established at COP26, and it has a one-fold vision. The vision is to support enhanced use of innovation for the many people and the planet. This vision is very important for us because we are mindful that while science is value neutral, innovation has always an agenda. And most of the time, innovation has been used to support power, be it military power or economic power. We would like to see innovation supporting more the many people and the planet. And we have a twofold mission. The first component is to facilitate the acceleration and the upscale deployment of existing innovative technology. The second part is to accelerate the development of the missing solution. And we have a threefold core value that are articulated around three key principles: caring, sharing, and daring. Caring because we believe that for innovation to serve the many people and the planet, it has to be genuinely caring for their needs and for their well-being. Sharing because the global challenge that we are facing cannot be addressed if we do not have a sharing mindset. We need to have a mindset of solution provider. It's not just about solving my problem, but it's about developing solutions that many can use to solve their problem. Sharing knowledge, sharing experience, and sharing value. The third aspect is very important. This is the daring part. It is important because when it comes to climate and sustainability, most of the time, objective and goal are set based on our perception of what is possible, not based on what is needed. And it's precisely the gap between what is needed and what is possible that is the key driver of innovation. Now, if you see our vision, our mission, and the three elements of our core value, they are all enabled by digital technology. And we firmly believe that the green transition will need necessarily to be a twin digital and green transition. This is why the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub I'm leading is very keen to develop strong relationship with the tech company. We have already some partnership established, and we are discussing, I continue to have discussion with some of the tech company to explore possibility of collaboration, particularly for the building of the digital platform that the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub would like to use, is developing currently to facilitate connection between the demand for solution and the supply of climate and sustainability solution. So digital technology is important for mitigation, it is important for sustainability, and definitively important for adaptation. So I welcome this session, and we are looking forward to learn from this session knowledge that can inform and inspire action on the ground. Over to you.
So, thank you very much, Masamba. I will not spend too much time. I would like to welcome to the stage Morita-san to start our session on advancing climate adaptation with digital technologies. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you hear? Can you hear? No? Can you hear? Can you hear? No? Is it okay? Okay, good, good. Unfortunately, I'm sorry for for this, but I have to sit down. It's locked. But good morning, everyone. And it's great to be here with you and, at COP28. Actually, this is the first time for me to be here. It's very important. And my name is Takayuki Morita, and the CEO of NEC Corporation. Since some of you may not know NEC, and so let me start by introducing our companies a little bit. NEC is a global technology company that was founded in Japan over 120 years ago. Today, we have a broad range of portfolio of solutions, from submarine cable to satellites, and from smart city infrastructure project, and to the R&D, such as biometrics and AI. One of our core business is to provide solutions for disaster management. This is very important considering our country, Japan, is a country with many natural disasters over the year. We have learned how to adapt to natural disasters over our history. As we face the gap of the 1.5 degree Celsius target, the time has come for us to give as much effort to climate adaptation as we do to climate mitigation. For adaptation, we know we have much to do. One point to recognize that emissions caused by natural disaster damage and reconstruction contribute more than 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. In this context, climate adaptation efforts are also a very important factor for climate mitigation. We should also consider the difference between the advanced economies and the global south. Advanced economies have strong infrastructure, the capability to invest, and access to new technology. On the contrary, the global south has more vulnerable infrastructure, and thus disasters cause a large loss of life in the global south. According to the World Meteorological Organization, over the past 50 years, the number of disasters have increased fivefold and economic losses has increased sevenfold. Despite those trends, investment in adaptation measures is only 1/18 of that to mitigation. This is a reality that we must face and solve. At NEC, we wanted to find ways that digital technologies could solve climate adaptations. One area where we know technology could help is to visualize data and to make it easier for people to understand its impact. Our R&D people launched an initiative to work with leading academias in Japan to identify specific technologies that can be used for precisely visualizing climate adaptation efforts. And we created a standardization framework and for adaptation values. Separately, we began working with leading financial institutes to develop a new approach to turn adaptation value into financial products to accelerate investment. Let me start by talking about our work on evaluation startup first. Adaptation value is often defined in terms of the economic losses that can be reduced by adaptation measures such as disaster prevention. We agree and call this disaster damage reduction value. However, the full impact is not limited to just that component. Adaptation measures can also reduce future rebuilding costs and its associated greenhouse gas emissions. We think that avoidance of reconstruction greenhouse emission is another important component and can be called environmental value. Together, the combination of these two components gives us a comprehensive view of overall adaptation value. calculating this kind of value was historically very difficult. But recent technology advancement are making it possible. We can now accurately observe the Earth using sensing technology or IoT on the ground combined with satellite monitoring from the space. NEC radar sensing satellite can provide millimeter level information about the surface of the Earth and detailed information about man-made infrastructure. Technology advancement of digital twin, AI, and high-performance computing enable us to virtually replicable the real world and run advanced simulations easily. The combination of highly accurate real-world observation and damage simulation technology makes it possible to calculate the difference in the impact of disasters both with and without adaptation measures. We conducted detailed analysis of past disasters, the economic and environmental value and damage was caused, and what could have been saved if adaptation measures had been taken. Let's look at two real cases. The first one was a massive flood happened in Japan in 2000. This flood is estimated to have caused $5.1 billion worth of damage and $160 million worth of greenhouse gas emissions during reconstruction. We use the surface evaluation data and the digital twin technology to simulate what would happen if adaptation measures like raising the river embankment by 1 meter had been taken. That simulation showed that if raising the embankment has been done, the damage from the flood would have been limited to only $1.1 billion of infrastructure damage and $40 billion worth of greenhouse emissions. In short, a total of $4 billion of value would have been generated. A second case was peatland fires in Indonesia. Indonesia holds 50% of the world's tropical peat, and the CO2 emissions from forest fires have become an issue. In 2017-2018, we worked with companies, including Sumitomo Forestry and a Japanese major forestry company, to minimize the spread of these fires by implementing early warning system. The system enables quick response by using GPS technology and a high-temperature warning system with infrared cameras. We ran simulations to show the impact of lowering the response time of firefighters to peatland fires. The results showed that if the response time were reduced by half, the economic losses could have been reduced by $4.4 billion, and greenhouse gas emissions of $15.2 billion could have been avoided. In total, we estimated that $19.6 billion of value would have been generated by these adaptation measures. Digital technologies of IoT, sensing, and digital twin simulations are foundation of our methodology. These technologies provide very precise details of the future economic value of adaptation measures in advance before taking actions. But we didn't do this analysis for just study. We did it because we hope that providing more visibility of the actual economic impact will lead to new kinds of adaptation financing. For this purpose, we created a kind of ecosystem with industry and academia who share the same vision. We looked at how adaptation value could be used in the case of bonds to help local government finance adaptation measures. Let me explain how it works. The current challenge for local government is to find funding for new adaptation measures given current budgetary constraints. Here is how new approach would work. IT company like us will play a key role in the development of value metrics. Local governments would provide geodemographic data to IT company who is calculating. In turn, the company would calculate metrics like the effectiveness of adaptation measures and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Financial institutions would use this adaptation value data to structure financial instruments like bonds. The bond could then be issued. Also, the associated adaptation value would be published so that potential investors could see. Investors could then make investment decisions for the adaptation based on credible information and expected return. As investors purchase bonds, financing would go to the local government, and they can spend more money to implement adaptation measures and hardware and IT solutions purchase. And there would be ongoing monitoring between IT company and local government to ensure the accuracy of the adaptation value to be realized. Finally, the bond will be redeemed by the investors. Once we can build this kind of new financial approach, the metrics for investment in adaptation will be more verifiable and should become more attractive to investors. NEC will continue to invest in new technology, new solutions for disaster prevention, and we will continue to improve our methodology for calculating future greenhouse emission reductions. We hope many of the organizations and government at this conference join us as we work toward new financial products for adaptation, like loans and insurance. We will need a larger ecosystem of private companies, financial institutions, government ministries, international standards, organizations, and academia to cooperate to take action. I would like to propose for the government support the implementation of test fields and share information needed for standardization. For financial institutes, design new financial products. And for IT companies, join us in creating new standards. I, as CEO of NEC Corporation, am committed to supporting this initiative. NEC will conduct more analysis and come back to COP29. Finally, let me say again, we have been implementing disaster adaptation solutions in Japan around the world for a long time. Our solutions for disaster prevention include infrastructure monitoring using both optical fiber and satellite space. We have wildfire alert system using infrared cameras and tsunami detection systems using submarine cable. These solutions have been deployed at scale and are working today. Our solutions are only part of the technologies available. Technology companies will work to innovate, but in order to implement these solutions and ensure that continue enjoy benefits of new technology, we will need new innovations in finance as well. We need innovations in both technology and finance to cope with these challenges that climate change is already causing. Thank you. I'm looking forward to a very fruitful discussion from now on. Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Morita-san. I would like to invite now to the panel discussion Kate Brandt. Kate is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Google, and she leads sustainability across Google's operations. Jim Gowen. Jim is the Senior Vice President, Global Procurement, and the Chief Sustainability Officer of Verizon, and he's also the Jesse Shaman. And I would like also to invite Yosef Nassef, UNFCCC Director for Climate Adaptation. He has over 34 years of experience in diplomacy and international environmental policy. So thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. We are living here in a very difficult environment, I guess, very challenging. My voice is not as loud as the other side voice, but I hope that we can have a very good conversation about this new challenge, which is for us to talk about climate adaptation. And I would like to congratulate NEC also to bring this thematic to our conversation, because we have been very much talking about climate mitigation. That has been our main focus, and I think we are entering a very interesting, new, challenging world. I never thought that 10% of the global emissions are coming from natural disasters. You know, it was a staggering, number to me, and we never accounted for that, in our thinking. So thank you so much, and Youssef, I would like to start with you. You leading climate adaptation at UNFCCC. How does adaptation differ at different levels, global, national, and subnational?
Thank you, Luis, and thank you to everyone. And I was also impressed by that number, the 10% from natural disaster, which we have never heard before. But it's very important to look at these linkages between mitigation and adaptation. And I think it's very important to start with the global backdrop. What's happening nowadays, basically? Why is adaptation becoming this important? Two numbers are really important. The science told us that we have to reduce emissions by 43% by 2030. In reality, the promises, not the actions, but just the promises, are leading to an increase of 8.8% by 2030. So if that happens, it means we are saving a bit on mitigation and adding a cost on the other side, on adaptation. So on the issue of levels, it's really interesting, because if we do a proxy with cost-benefit analysis, if you do a financial analysis for a project itself, you might get a positive net present value. But if you do it for the whole economy, it can become a negative one. So trying to evaluate adaptation at the level of a firm, or at the level of a city, or at the level of a country, you can get different assessments of viability at each level. There's something in logic called the fallacy of composition and the fallacy of division. So if the components point to a certain direction, it doesn't mean that the aggregation points to a certain direction. Let me explain. So for one country, say, that has a lot of forests, one adaptation measure might be to convert all these forests into agricultural land. Remove the forest, and then it declares itself adapted to food security. But in the aggregate for the whole world, that is a reduction in resilience, a reduction in adaptation. So we see this all the time, transboundary impacts. As we try to scale up adaptation and look at national adaptation plans, you see that in some cases, the enhancement of resilience in one country, especially in shared river basins, for example, can lead to a reduction in resilience in another. So that's a big problematic that we have to face now. At what scale do we measure adaptation and declare that something is a priority or not? We do not have the solution for that yet, because adaptation so far has been done piecemeal, project level here and there. As we elevate it to the level that is needed, we are hitting these limits of what economics can help us in the evaluation of adaptation. So that's one big issue, the matter of scope. Now, subnational, national, global, very different stories. It's not a simple arithmetic aggregation. It means different things to different people. But also, the whole state of being adapted. It's not a simple thing like mitigation. You get a number, whether a warming level or a level of concentration, parts per million in the atmosphere, or carbon budget. Here there is no number to indicate adaptation. There's many sectors. There's trade-offs over time. There is a subjective assessment depending on a community's willingness to accept risk or not. So in two parallel universes, one country may accept more risk than another, and it could be the reverse in another one. And so that subjective assessment of what does it mean to be adapted is something that cannot be done by a third party trying to crunch numbers on a piece of paper. And one example I can give, when we started something called the National Adaptation Programs of Action, that was country level for least developed countries. One country went to local communities, it was in Africa, and said that that community was refusing to cooperate because it says, due to their own beliefs, adaptation, once they understood why it was needed, they said this is a normal consequence for our action and we have to accept it. We should not fight it over. So even the role of beliefs and culture and religion is very important in this case. So at different levels, adaptation means different things. We are trying now in the international process to find how to articulate what's the landing zone for the whole world, what we call a global goal on adaptation. We're running into interesting methodological issues there because, like I said, there are trade-offs, there are different perceptions per country. We use the SDGs as a starting point, but still in doing that, you find very different aspirations for different countries, different communities. And so we're looking at a process of creating a massive methodology, basically, that allows a bottom-up assessment of adaptation and trying to interface these levels together in ways that make sense. So we need your help from Nippon Electric and everyone else's to help us in this thought process. It's a new one, and we need to get something in the end that helps the world land in a resilient place, but based on some rigor that has not been invented yet. So let me stop here and we get to the next one.
Okay, thank you so much, Youssef. I'd like to go to Kate. Google is at the forefront of applying AI technologies to address climate change challenges. Can you elaborate a little bit more on some of the AI-powered solutions that Google is developing to advance climate adaptation?
Thank you so much, Luis. And can you all hear me? No? Okay, sorry, it was one sec. Can you hear me now? All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Luis, and a pleasure to be here with you all this morning. So at Google, we have been an AI-first company for the last 7 years, and we are deeply committed to exploring applications of AI in a bold and responsible way and in partnership. And last week, we released a piece of research in partnership with Boston Consulting Group looking at the big opportunities that AI presents for climate, both from a mitigation and an adaptation perspective. And so a couple of the key findings from the report were that if we can use AI to supercharge existing technology and their applications, we can see a reduction in emissions of 5 to 10% by 2030. And as you may know, that's actually really quite significant. That's roughly equivalent to the emissions of the European Union. So there's major opportunity for AI to be an accelerant in this decisive decade to drive action more rapidly on mitigation. But equally, we also found there's so much opportunity for AI to support us on mitigation and on adaptation and resilience, what we've been talking about here today. So I wanted to share with you a couple of the really exciting opportunities we're seeing at Google to apply AI in this way. The first is around riverine flooding, and the second is around wildfires. So first, on the topic of riverine flooding, we know that this is a huge and growing issue for communities around the world. And so our Google research team, under my wonderful colleague, Dr. Yossi Matias, who's here with us at COP, built a really breakthrough world meteorological model that enables us to gain new insights into riverine flooding. And we can now actually predict riverine flooding 7 days in advance. And this is critically important to enable communities to prepare, to put out emergency alerts. And one of the ways we actually do that is through Google SOS alerts that people can receive on their smartphones, through Google Maps and Google Search. So having this information 7 days in advance is very powerful for saving lives. And so this is now available for over 80 countries around the world. It's now available for countries on every continent that are home to about 470 million people. But our goal is to keep expanding, to make this information available to every country, and also to look at other forms of flooding beyond riverine flooding. And then further, we're also partnering with Google.org, which is our philanthropic arm, to also partner with local aid organizations like the Red Cross and Red Crescent for communities where people may not have smartphones, so they can't receive those alerts that could be pushed out, and so to train trusted members of the community to also receive those alerts and deliver them. So there's a huge opportunity space around flooding. Then also wildfires. I know that came up in the session earlier. As we know, it's so critically important that we track and find wildfires early. So the combination of satellite imagery and AI to do that is a really powerful combination. And so now in parts of the US, Canada, Mexico, and Australia that are particularly prone to wildfires, we're showing wildfire boundary maps in real time, and then they're getting updated every 15 minutes. That can show people where is the wildfire, where is it spreading, which is of course critically important to support evacuation for people to know how to get out of harm's way. And then similarly, we want to better understand why and how wildfires spread. And so we've teamed up with the U.S. Forest Service to help them to do the biggest update to their wildfire spread model in 50 years. And this is the model that's being used to train firefighters and first responders to enable us to better respond to wildfire. So these are a couple of really exciting examples, Luis, that we're seeing around AI in supporting resilience and adaptation.
Okay, thank you so much. I had the opportunity of reading your report, and thank you for sending it over to me. It's amazing, the power of AI. So that's, this new world that we are living in, that again proves the power of technology. So I always say, since we have been looking into the role of technology in connection to climate change since 2007, just with our smart reports, the digital repurpose report, and every single report that we do with new technologies coming up, we see a much, much bigger impact. And our challenge here, as I said in the morning, is how do we bring technology into the climate conversation, really to address and to respond, and to make politicians understand how technology can help to respond to climate change.
Absolutely, and thank you for your leadership in doing that, Luis. It's so important that we communicate that message.
That's great. So Jim, Verizon as a telecom operator leads climate adaptation. What is Verizon doing internally and externally to reduce the effects of climate change?
Yeah, so thanks, Luis, and welcome to everyone. And before I start, a huge shout out to the UNFCC. I'm a first-time COP attendee. The amount of business here is an awesome example of how partnerships are happening. It's great to sit next to a partner, specifically one on the technology side, and as well as an infrastructure partner as well, and then UNFCC across the board, and then Jesse. So for those of you not familiar with Jesse, we're an over 200-member company in the ICT sector, and we're focusing on innovation across the board and how do we bring green technologies. For those of you who don't know Verizon, we're one of the largest telecommunications companies in the world, the largest in the United States. And really what I wanted to focus on, and I know we're short on time, and I know we got some competitive conversations, is really to talk about we're doing all the things that we should be doing. We have our Scope 1 and our Scope 2 net zero targets. We're working on our Scope 3. Yesterday's conversation was all about collaboration, up and down, with partners that are going to have to respond to our Scope 3 requests for transparency, because that's how we're going to change the supply chain. But when you start looking at a company like ourselves, which is infrastructure-based, very capital-intensive, real estate, when you look going from copper to fiber, we spend each year over $19 billion in CapEx. That's our investment each year. And how do you sustain that when you're servicing over 100 million customers every day? There's just an obligation both for our consumer side and then the solutions we bring to our enterprise side. So we've all heard about the smart cities. We're starting to see smart cities really come to fruition. I loved during Magda Martin's opening when she talked about the things that, from a green perspective, that the ITU is doing. We are big supporters of that, and we're big fans of the direction they're going. The last thing I'll say, again, I want to be very conscious of time. I want to recognize everyone who's here, because the conversations in the last 24 hours have been ones we haven't had in a while. Jesse had its Digital with Purpose conference, of which Jeffrey Sachs was a fantastic representative. You have no idea how big you were on that screen in the auditorium in Portugal. But the conversation is really changing, and it's not going to change overnight. It's going to have to come incrementally. When we talk at Verizon, what do we do every day? We run networks. We run the best wireless and fiber networks around the world. What do? We support first responders. I loved what Google's talking about when it comes to fires. We want to support those first responders going in there, making sure the network's up all the time. But at the exact same time, we have to focus on greening that network, from renewable energy straight through to removing old equipment, reusing old equipment. Not everything's going to get 5G, no matter what the commercials tell you. We have to keep reusing 4G. That's a whole part of a circular economy and a circular supply chain, but I won't get into that now. Turn it back over to you, Luis.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Kate, coming back to you again, partnership is a key theme of Google's sustainability strategy. From your point of view, what are the key opportunities for collaboration and why is it important?
Yes, no, indeed, and I've had the honor and the privilege of serving as a Chief Sustainability Officer, both for the U.S. federal government and now at Google for many years, and I think what that has shown me is the critical opportunity for public-private partnerships. So I just want to highlight three in particular that we're excited about right now. The first is around extreme heat in urban areas. We know that about 500,000 people are impacted by extreme heat-related deaths every year, and that particularly the urban heat island effect is a growing concern in many cities around the world. So we are, again, looking to the power of AI to unlock solutions to urban heat and to support cities as key partners in the planning that they need to do to address this. So first, we've found great opportunities to use machine learning to better assess aerial imagery of cities so that we can identify where current tree canopy exists. And so today, our Tree Canopy Explorer tool, which is embedded in something called our Environmental Insights Explorer, has information for 2,000 cities where they can look and see where is the tree coverage that exists in their city today, and then use that information to determine where they need to plant more trees to deal with urban heat island effect. And so we're seeing cities like Austin in Texas in the States that has now used this information to plant more trees, to put in place bus shelters for more shading to support vulnerable communities. And then similarly, we're seeing an opportunity to use aerial imagery to support cities in understanding where could they apply cool roofs, whether that's white roofs, other cool roof technologies. This can be an easy way also to address urban heat island effect and then also to reduce the need for cooling within buildings, which has a mitigation benefit as well. So we're very excited about that work with cities. Secondly, I mentioned previously the flood forecasting work, and the panel before ours was talking about the Early Warnings for All initiative under the UN. We've been so pleased to get to partner with the WMO on that initiative, and we're actively working with them now to determine how can we bring the insights from Flood Hub into what they're doing for Early Warnings for All. And then the last partnership that I would point to is one with the UN high-level champions. And we actually began this conversation at COP last year, and we had a great design sprint when we were in New York for UNGA, looking at how can we use AI to support the champions agenda around cities. And so we're really looking forward to moving that work forward in 2024. So those are a few of my favorite partnerships examples right now.
Oh, great examples, Kate. So, Youssef, how is adaptation assessed and how should it be assessed in the future, taking into account the evolution of frontier technology?
Well, thank you very much, Luis, for that. And it's so heartening to hear of how technology is helping us move into that future state where assessment with the help of these frontier technologies is changing. So in the past, we used to use projections and models and then go from down there to what a country should do. It was basically most on exposure. Then eventually started a bottom-up assessment where we took into account the adaptive capacity of communities and the vulnerability as sort of a multidimensional formula. And now the world is changing a bit. There's already companies selling their risk assessment outcomes using AI. And the problem one fears here is what type of new inequalities are we creating? So we support 46 least developed countries in assessing their adaptation needs. And I can assure you they're not using these types of nice new technologies in in prioritizing their needs, which we have a mandate to actually provide financial support to afterwards through the Green Climate Fund. So the important thing here is to make sure that we move the whole world together. So the benefits of all these innovations and technologies do not get us in 2030 to say, oops, now by 2045 we want to undo that gap that we created between 2015 and 2030 while focusing on other things. And there's a certain level of cognitive dissonance in how the world works. So we're cleaning up the oceans at this point in time, while at the same time having no problem with littering space, and then we'll come back to cleaning that at some point in the future. So the assessments, we have AI, Internet of Things, satellite technology, biotechnology, material science, all moving in a certain direction that is going to change the face of how we assess and implement vulnerability. And at the same time, we need to make sure that that gap between developed and developing countries does not get enhanced in a very different way from what we had before as we move these things forward. Now, an added complexity, as I mentioned before, is that there's a lot of subjectivity in where the landing zone is for different communities. There's many trade-offs across sectors, across boundaries, across time. And intergenerational equity is something that is often forgotten in how we assess economically and business-wise what to do today versus what to do tomorrow. In an assessment we did of one coastal US city, there was always a clear priority to be taken for one, to be accorded to one particular action. It was moving the power station. But because of political expediency, it always got relegated to a secondary priority because someone else would get the credit. It would take a long time to implement. And so time is really important. And a succession of short-term solutions does not amount to a long-term one. So I fear that this is a second cognitive bias here, bias against the future that we have. And hopefully, as we advance these technologies, we take into account how do we disarm the forces that pull us to prioritizing the short term. And this is something I aspire to seeing coming out of the application of these new technologies. Now, a lot of the examples we've heard in the application of new technologies for resilience focus on doing more, faster, better. But there's also opportunities for doing totally different stuff. The holy grail for resilience is a move towards regenerative food production. And for that to happen and to become profitable at a large-scale agriculture level, you need polyculture, you need robotics, and you need autonomous systems that can identify and manipulate different crops over different days. We don't have that yet. Research isn't being directed as a priority in that direction, and that needs to happen if we are to look at that landing zone in the end in a way that helps us incentivize technology in a certain direction. So there are new things also that go beyond doing things better or doing things faster or doing more of the same in a way that benefits humanity. So the final point I'd like to leave you with is to try to think of resilience beyond the gloom and doom scenario. I know in the UN we say we're sleepwalking towards disaster, etc. But also it's an opportunity to convert the world into the best version of itself, to become more resilient, to create abundance, to expand the planetary boundaries. We are used to thinking in a very constrained way. How can we just undo harm? So move from a problem/solution mindset to one of creative design of the future. And I think it's all in the hands of the businesses that are creating that future as we move. So with this, I thank you very much, and back to you, Luis.
Thank you so much, Youssef. And we will be working with you in the future, so for sure. So before I invite Professor Jeffrey Sachs here to the stage, Jim, one last question. Tell me about how is Verizon's leadership and governance system involved in Verizon's climate adaptation work?
All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to change it to how do we work in this room with leadership? Because I'm incredibly proud of what Verizon does, and we put our money where our mouth with $5 $1 billion green bonds, and we've done all we had. But I'm going to take Masamba's words from a few minutes ago, which was sharing, caring, and daring. And I think anyone at this conference understands the aspect of the sharing and the caring. There's no doubt. The diversity is fantastic. But the daring is the challenge. And the daring is for all of us here, because competitors have to sit at the same table in business. UN folks have to sit, NGOs have to sit, and it's got to be along how do we dare to look at things differently and look at things not just from a business perspective or not just from a government perspective, but somewhere. So I really appreciate Masamba's comments there. I appreciate the panelists here, and I thank you all for being here today.
Thank you so much, Jim. So, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, I would like to invite you to the floor. I don't need to introduce you. You are famous, quite well known to everybody here, I guess. I would like to thank you for joining us today, and would like to invite you as well to make the final comments about our conversation.
Thank you very much, Luis. What a wonderful panel, filled with solutions and very, very impressive. But it shows also how difficult it is to organize globally to actually implement the solutions. And this, I think, is our biggest struggle that we face at COP28. After all, we've been doing this 28 years now. The world has gotten a lot more dangerous in climate change. We have a lot more wars going on now than we did 28 years ago. We're in worse shape in a lot of ways, much better technologies, but we're not solving global problems. And all of the discussions were really wonderful in terms of technically how things could be approached. And I love the NEC model. And as you were doing it, I leaned over to my wife and I said, that's exactly right. Perfect. All of the lines of how you get the information, how you tap the capital markets in the end, and so forth. So implementing these solutions is the critical point. What's the problem? I think the problem is our institutional setup, which is a historically determined setup based on private companies and on national states. We take that as the background, as given. These are not ideally suited to solve global problems. And they're not ideally suited for several reasons. But two have been mentioned. One is half the world is so impoverished, it's not part of this discussion other than in an aid project here and there. That's not keeping up with reality at all. The half of the world at the bottom, which are the categories in the World Bank's classification of low-income countries and lower middle-income countries, 4 billion people, 82 countries, 79 of them do not have an investment-grade credit rating. They can't reach capital other than at very high costs, very short term. They're outside of the world. We don't have a solution for that. And that is because of the second factor. We're organized, companies are organized primarily for their shareholders. It's got a lot of merit, but the shareholders are not the 4 billion people in the poor world, period. They're not even the vast majority of people in the rich world. They're a small part of the top. Okay. The second is nation states. We take that as granted. It's a mess. We don't have enough governance at the global level. The UN is literally a talk shop. It's my favorite talk shop in the world. I devote my whole life to it just to understand, just to explain. I'm not denigrating it. I give every waking hour of my life to the UN for $1 a year, thanks to Columbia University, making it possible. But it's a talk shop. It doesn't raise taxes. It doesn't have an army. It doesn't have resources. It stands for the crossroads of the world. It represents the poor people better than any other institution in the world that I know, because it's got members. All of those are member states. That's the remarkable fact of having a UN with 193 member states. But no tax authority, no army, no geopolitical weight, only respect only holding the treaties or holding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or holding the UN Charter. If the United States cared about the UN Charter, it would be a better world. Believe me, they don't. The government, I mean. I've dealt with this for 43 years. The United States government thinks the UN is an afterthought, a footnote. It's a place in New York. It's a press opportunity. It's an embarrassment. It's a nuisance. But this is the problem of real politics in this world. So we have global problems that are more global than at any time in human history. Because we're the first time. We're 8 billion people. We're completely interconnected thanks to the wonderful technologies that these people help to lead. So much good can come out of this, but we're completely interconnected. And of course, we're here because we're changing the world's environment at an alarming, terrifying rate that we're barely aware of, that is extraordinarily dangerous, that gives us a few years to solve these problems. And they're global, and no national government can do it by themselves, and few have any incentives. And the United States, the most powerful country, it happens to be mine, so I talk about it the most, is almost useless in this. Useless. The Congress is corrupt. They don't vote anything except tax cuts. You read the New York Times article, if you saw it yesterday, booming oil production. That's our contribution to global climate, is booming oil production. And wars nonstop. So we're not solving any of these problems. So the point I'm making is the solutions are all here. What I love is actually the governments working with the UN is a huge, important thing. It may look to a company, well, it's nice to be with the UN. The UN's the only global governance institution possible. You are global companies. There's no more company more global than Google, actually. So you need to work with the UN centrally, not as a nice thing or as an afterthought, but because we cannot do this otherwise. The US wants you to improve the military. Okay. I don't want that. But anyway, the UN wants you to improve the world. And that's the number one thing. But second, we need to make the financial system work for this. And what Chairman Morita said about tapping the capital markets with better knowledge is one part of it. I think it's a huge part of it, by the way. Because the way the capital markets work is not right now. The credit rating agencies are very primitive in how they work. The IMF's very primitive in how it works. What you need to bring is the detailed information, and then you show that is an investable project. So this is a real important innovation. But the other thing we need is finance at the global scale with taxation, which we don't have right now. We really need to levy a global tax on CO2 emissions and put that not at national governments, put that in the UN so the UN can do its work as the global government for this purpose. We need that. And just to tell you, if we were to tax 10 cents on historic emissions of CO2, for responsibility, that would be $160 billion by itself a year. Just 10 cents per ton of historic emissions. And if you put $5 on current emissions of CO2, which is about a 40th or maybe a 20th of the social cost of carbon, just $5, that gets you $200 billion a year. So all this moaning and groaning that we don't have the resources to do it is nonsense. The whole U.S. government was designed in 1787 to keep the government away from wealthy people. I can document that. That was John Locke's idea. James Madison put it into the Constitution. It works very effectively. The U.S. will never raise taxes on rich people. So we have to tax globally so that we get the resources that we need. So my point, just to summarize, is you have witnessed all the solutions. We're in the world of the golden age of technology. It's unbelievable. And we all know it every day. We're blown out of our minds of what can be done right now. More knowledge at our fingertips. All we have to do is ask ChatGPT, how do you solve this thing? We'll get a perfectly sensible answer. But then implementing is the key. You can't do without the private businesses. Without these businesses, we wouldn't have the technologies. We wouldn't have the $19 billion a year of actual investment built to make the grid. It wouldn't work. But we do have to face the fact that the shareholders in the world are different, so we have to reconcile that. And we have to reconcile the fact that Europe grew up as feuding, warring nation states, and that's our global system. It's not a great system, actually. It's really flawed. We need global government at a much more sophisticated level than we have. But we're making a step because the UN, it's the second attempt, League of Nations, the first one, disaster. This one, very fragile. We've got to make it work. But everything we heard here about the partnerships and the linkages is the key. But don't take it just as nice language or as self-evident that it's going to work. Don't believe that the US government or any other government has the world at heart. These are politicians. They have their role. Their role is power and staying in power. That's how they think their role is. I think their role is the common good. That's why I don't like almost any of our politicians, because they've got a different view of what their job is than what I think it should be. But in any event, making this cooperation work globally so that the corporations can do their good work, solve these problems, but then extend to the whole world. And we can have the whole world in our view, and we can have financial solutions, not for the richest few, but for the whole world. That's why we're at COP28, but we can't get to COP50 still debating these things. We have to actually solve them because we've run out of time. My colleague Jim Hansen last week said 1.5 degrees is dead. Don't even think about it. It's a joke. We're going to exceed it in the next 3 or 4 years. We're already exceeding it many days this year. This is our tragedy. We're so late. This is so complicated. National governments are fighting wars instead of solving this problem. The UN is the only place that it can be solved, but it's fragile. And these companies are the only ones that can solve this problem, but they have to have the incentives aligned for the global solutions. That's our challenge. Thanks.
What a fantastic closure. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much to all of you, to Morita-san and NEC for providing us the opportunity to have this great session at the Digital Innovation Hub. Thank you so much.